So go straight into this. It's a piece in the Daily Express, the 18th of March 2024. Daily Express, mind, right-wing tabloid. So, anyone that would say this is, you know, an anti-Trump source, that's misguided because I think in 2016, if anything, they probably would have been pro-Trump, or at least they're certainly not a typical anti-Trump source, put it that way. So Trump warns of bloodbath if he loses vote. This is by Christopher Buckton, the US editor. I think Mr. Buckton works for other papers as well. I think I've seen his name elsewhere. Anyway, Donald Trump has claimed there will be a bloodbath if he is not re-elected in November, while saying migrants are not people. The former president's use of incendiary language at a campaign rally in Ohio was a return to his previous political playbook that saw him leave the White House in 2016. Saw him win the White House in 2016. He said, if I don't get elected, it's going to be a bloodbath. That's going to be the least of it. It's going to be a bloodbath for the country. The deadly January the 6th riot by his supporters trying to overturn the 2020 election, which he lost to Joe Biden, is a heavy presence throughout his campaign events. He opened Saturday's rally with a recording of those convicted for the 2021 insurrection singing the American national anthem. Saluting the crowd, he then said he would issue pardons for them on his first day of the presidency. In the opening words of his rally, he said, "You could see the spirit from the hostages," and that's what they are, hostages. Trump, 77, who was impeached for inciting his supporters to storm the US Capitol in the effort to overturn his 2020 election loss, also discussed immigration. The Republican candidate criticized Mr. Biden over his handling of America's southern border as he cast migrants as less than human. He said, "In some cases, they're not people, in my opinion." Trump again promoted his America First policy, telling the crowd that if he wins re-election on November the 5th, China will not be able to sell any vehicles imported into the US. Following Saturday's rally, Mr. Biden's campaign spokesperson James Singer, accused Trump of doubling down on his threats of political violence. He said he wants another January the 6th, but the American people are going to give him another electoral defeat this November because they continue to reject his extremism, his affection for violence, and his thirst for revenge. Trump campaign spokesman Stephen Chung said the former US apprentice star had been discussing the impact of a second Biden term on the auto industry and the broader economy with his bloodbath comments. He said crooked Joe Biden and his campaign are engaging in deceptively out-of-touch editing. Trump repeatedly noted his difficulty reading from the teleprompters, which could be seen whipping in 35-mile-per-hour gusts. Well, Chung is just a typical Trump cheerleader, a typical Trump propagandist, covering up for Trump's own words. This is very typical of the Trump campaign. Now, a few points to make here. The issue about the southern border, it is a pressing issue. And, those of us outside the United States need to consider that for people living in Texas or Arizona or New Mexico, that is pretty much like people living in Kent. It's a hot button topic. And I've always felt that the United States, being as it is a country built by immigrants, nevertheless, like any country, it has a right to have some control on its borders. But this is typical of Trump, going in like a bull to a china shop. He could have been specific. He could have said, we have a problem with drug cartels. We have a problem with those sort of people coming into the border. But instead, he just uses generic language about some of them, not talking in any sort of specific way. Yes, he said some of them. He's not generalizing, but I do not think that Donald Trump is a statesman. But by the way, when I say generic language, I'm talking about the flippant way he talks about things, because he does. Um, And as for the bloodbath comments, Chung can say that this is specifically about the auto industry. Well, why isn't Trump saying that? Why isn't he saying that Biden will cause a bloodbath for the auto industry? This, to me, is a clear incitement to violence. Bear in mind, Donald Trump is a sore loser. He told his supporters to stand by. He's now talking about those who did engage in violence. This should be the telling point. He's not distancing himself from those who did engage in violence. Now, this surely is proof that he is complicit with these people. He's not saying, they crossed the line, they shouldn't have stormed the Capitol building. He is actually calling them hostages, these criminals. I think that is a complete disgrace. To me, Donald Trump is unique. There has never been an American president who's been so toxic in terms of inciting insurrection. Never. I mean, if you look at the polls, the ratings of the worst presidents, and granted their academic studies, maybe public opinions would have a different list, but the ones at the bottom are usually Andrew Johnson, who overturned civil rights after the American Civil War, the notoriously corrupt administration of Warren G. Harding. Harding was initially very popular, but his administration was notoriously corrupt. The Teapot Dome scandal of 1923, I believe it was, or 22. And another figure is James Buchanan, who failed to prevent the American Civil War. Donald Trump now ranks with those people, you know, far, far worse than any other American president in terms of what he has done, in terms of that incitement to insurrection. None of them done that. Even Jefferson Davis, the Confederate president, certainly waged insurrection, but the Confederates never got to the capital. So this is a unique situation. No American president has encouraged the Russian dictator to attack NATO allies. Now, Trump's supporters will say, or not his supporters, his apologists will say, well, he's unpredictable. This is just typical Trump. You know, he was using similar rhetoric leading up to the 2016 election, and then when he got into the White House, relations with Russia soured. Well, if Trump's playing some sort of strategy here to confuse the Russians, like sort of playing the devil's advocate, and then when he gets into the White House, he'll be more hardline, that's still not good enough because that polarizes Ukraine. It polarizes countries in the Baltic states. You know, they need reassurance. They don't need Donald Trump to be playing games here. They need reassurance. Um, so I think it's a complete disgrace. But if there is violence, if he wins the election, I think he'll be vindictive. I think he'll try and find some way to go after Biden and the Democrats. If he loses, I hope he does, but if he loses, I think there is a real threat of violence. Now, this year, I think it's in summer, there's a film that's going to be released by Danny Boyle, simply called Civil War. And it's a scenario whereby there's basically a second American Civil War. I don't think that's going to happen, certainly not in terms of an actual armed conflict. But I think American politics right now is absolutely toxic. The truth is, every American election has some degree of toxicity, some degree of tensions, but it's never been this bad. I honestly would say that it's never been this bad outside of the Civil War. And within the Civil War, you know, you had Jefferson Davis wasn't a candidate for American president, you know, was what was. I have nothing but contempt for Donald Trump. I think he's a dangerous character. I think he's unstable. I actually think he's clinically, I think he's mentally unstable. I think he will say anything to his supporters, which is more worse than being just a carnival barker. This is someone who has actually been in the White House, and we saw what happened when he lost. Um, I don't know how anyone could say that the violence on January the 6th has nothing to do with Trump. That's delusional, utterly delusional. And I don't know at this point how any intelligent person can support Trump. I can understand how naive people would support him. And here's the thing, I'm not saying like they need to support Biden. I can understand disillusion with Biden. Um, you know, particularly with rising living costs and stuff and the concerns on the southern border. I get that. I can understand the disillusionment. And I will also say that the left isn't innocent when it comes to invoking violence. There have been senior Democrats, such as Nancy Pelosi, who have stoked things up, particularly around the George Floyd riots. So the left is not innocent in this either. But Biden hasn't stoked up violence. You know, he may have memory problems. There's plenty of reasons to criticize Biden, but he has not encouraged the Russian dictator to attack NATO. He has not encouraged domestic insurrection in the same way. I wouldn't be fully on board with Biden. I do think he's pandered to the woke left of his party, but I think Trump is utterly toxic. I think he's a traitor to the West. And I just hope that the current popularity that he's enjoying ostensibly is kind of a temporary thing, whereby when it actually comes to November, people will say this is no longer primary season. This is actually, you know, the real chance of Trump getting back in again. If he does, Yes, it will be the democratic decision of the American people, but it will be returning a man who has shown contempt for democracy. I think it would be a real grave threat to the West, and I certainly don't think what we should excessively pander him to. Why? Just because he's the American president, if that happens? No. I don't think we should roll out the red carpet for Trump. Why should he get special treatment? Not every American president does, and I sure as hell don't think Trump should, particularly when he is openly undermining Western institutions to the benefit of a Russian dictator. Um, so yeah, I really think Trump is dangerous. Some will say, "Oh, it's just all hot air," but words matter with leaders. Words matter, and I think it's pathetic that his PR people try and say, "Oh, it's taken out of context." For once, Donald Trump and his campaign should take some damn responsibility for the words that come out of his mouth.